Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back in to bring you the state of Spirit Shell, all the testing that I've been able to do so far, some of my thoughts on what's been happening with the spec, where I see everything going as we speak, and, you know, what might actually happen as Sanctum of Domination tests start moving into Mythic. At the moment, we've tested 7 out of the 10 possible heroic bosses. We haven't tested Sylvanas yet, and there's a couple middle fights that we haven't tested yet either. So what I wanted to do is I want to talk about generally what I've seen so far, and then we're going to start talking about this week's latest test. So starting it off, probably the biggest thing and the most important thing is that I've been playing around with Spirit Shell, both with and without Mindbender, and I've been playing around with Evangelism and Rapture, okay? Most of my experiences is that if you don't have mind games for something, you go nowhere. You know, your atonement output is just like really weak, really meh. You're wholesale reliant on mind games to pretty much get everything done. As a result of this, you are a little bit struggling, I would say, especially when you have 1 hour to test a heroic boss to be able to try to figure out your ramp timers, figure out when things happen. And it's also made quite a bit more difficult by the fact that most of these raid fights are actually very different from Castle Nathria. Castle Nathria featured crazy amounts of 1 minute timers or minute 15 timers or something along those lines, right? But when it comes specifically to Sanctum of Domination, at least at the moment, there's tons of variable damage timers. And what do I mean by that? I mean that a mechanic will happen, but either, you know, the player affected by the mechanic or the raid itself gets to sort of decide when that damage actually goes out, which makes it a whole bunch more difficult to be able to deal with. Not only that, but a lot of the fight timers are around like 35 to 40 seconds or something like that, just out of Mind Game's reach. So there's multiple times that you might actually have, you know, an Evangelism for one, a Rapture for the other, or Spirit Shell for one and 2 Radiance charges for another. But then you don't have Mind Games. And so then you might do, like, for example, a Spirit Shell standard ramp, and then you get 2 Radiance charges later on and you still don't have Spirit Shell yet. So you might double cast your Radiance and then try to use a Schism into Penance or something like that. But you just have, like, no output, you know? It's a very small amount of healing. You lose quite a bit of output by just not having Mind Games available. So it feels really bad in that regard, right? So in many respects, it's just been very challenging, I think, for Dis to start making some good headway. Some of the fights I definitely felt like I was falling behind on. But when we specifically look at something like Kel'thuzad, which is the penultimate boss, you have something very similar to Eternal Palace with the Queen's Court. You'll have these glacial spikes that spawn, and you kill them, and then they explode, and they also leave a dot on the raid, right? So you pretty much kill like 2 of them at a time, and then you kill the 3rd one a little bit later, you know? So in that regard, it's like, okay, well, you can Spirit Shell, and you can cover the first 2, and then you wait until it falls off, and then you kill 1, and then the rest of the healers sort of pick it up from there. And that's been fine. But some of the other mechanics on different fights, and also the frequency of when you get something like glacial spikes is rough. Because you'll have the first one that comes out, and you'll Spirit Shell it. And then you'll have the second one come out, and it'll come out too quickly before your Mind Games return. So you kind of have, like, I guess, a mini ramp where you don't really do a whole lot. That ends, and then Mind Games returns, and then you're waiting another, like, 30 seconds after that for the next mechanic to come back. So you're just, like, sitting on Mind Games for a while, right? What I've been trying to do, and this specifically happened a lot in Fatescribe Roh-kalo, is that I would try to have like an early Spirit Shell cast to deal with the Artificer type mechanic that it would put on the tank, where, you know, it debuffs the tank and they run out of the raid and it explodes, right? So I try to have like Spirit Shell really early, and then he'd do it 40 seconds later, and if I did Spirit Shell early enough, then I'd be able to have Mind Games that would happen. But if we went into a 3rd round of this mechanic, then I would actually just be totally screwed. So there's been a couple different areas where the timings have just been really annoying to deal with, very just frustrating to deal with as well. Disc overall seems like once you get more than just like an hour of practice on a boss, you can actually spend time sitting down, looking at some logs, trying it again. I think things will be a lot better, especially considering, you know, we'll be downscaled to a 20-man raid size on Mythic instead of the 26 or 27 that we are usually running with for our raid tests. So that'll be a significant factor too. That other healers aren't going to be as brutal to you when you're in these heroic raid fights and everything that are coming out. But it seemed like variable damage timers were huge, and it seemed like, from what we've seen thus far, a lot of the timers are really, really focused on like that 30 to 40 second period, as opposed to almost everything in Castle Nathria being about a minute. In other cases, you'd have something like Sludge Fist, where the pillar breaks were about like a minute 10 apart or something like that, a minute 15. They were just like a little bit further apart, right? But having that extra time was actually great because you could have a little bit of flexibility, you know? Same thing with like Hungering Destroyer, right? You'd have, Desolates happening every 30, 40 seconds, right? But then you also had Consumes. So you would be able to, for example, ramp for a Desolate and then ramp for a Consume afterwards. And then, so you'd have, when we played double disc on Hungry Destroyer, for example, it was great because I could have one disc ramp for the Desolate, another disc ramp for the second Desolate, the first disc ramps for the first Consume, the second disc ramps for the next Desolate following the Consume. You just go back and forth, and there's always something to do. But on a lot of these fights, when we did Soulrender Dormazain as well, as an example, he would basically have this mechanic where he'd throw chains onto Garrosh, and you had to snap the chains in order to interrupt Garrosh so he doesn't nuke your raid. And that would happen. It started at like 1 minute, and then it wouldn't be until like almost 2 minutes later, and then it was like 2.5 minutes later. It was so weird. We were basically able to use like every raid CD or most of our raid CDs almost every single time, no problem, right? So a lot of times when that damage happened, you just have everybody dive piling into it to try to be able to heal it or reduce the damage that goes out onto it. And it's like, okay, well, this is nice, but then there's nothing else to ramp for. And so then the other healers, like the Paladins and the Shamans, are picking up a lot of healing that's just like spot healing. It's almost like you're playing on Stone Legion General on some of these fights where, yeah, you ramp for, the boulder falling from the skies, but after that, you're just doing nothing. You don't really have a lot that you're able to do. Even your mini ramps, your extra radiance charge and something like Stone Legion Generals doesn't always feel that effective and that powerful. That's kind of the feeling I've gotten throughout a number of these fights. When we went and did Eye of the Jailer, you also have sort of the added annoyance that the raid gets split in two to kill two eyes on opposite sides of the room. So you kind of like toss some atonements out into one end, then you walk to the other end and toss some atonements out there, and then you try to add some damage to be able to hit the eye and build up some shields across the room, and then the mechanic explodes. And then if you're still in that phase, 30 seconds later, you have another mechanic and you have nothing available for it, right? So that was a pain. One of the fights I did like, though, was, well, sort of liked. It was Remnant of Ner'zhul. And this fight was particularly interesting because the boss was pretty steadily adding and contributing extra damage onto the raid to heal, but it had the extra sort of side effect that the damage sources for the raid was actually coming from knockbacks. So if you dispelled people, it would knock the entire raid back. So you're trying to build up some shields, get the knockback dispel, get everybody stabilized, then get another dispel, and you get knocked back again. So if you're late, you're in trouble. If you're trying to do like a double radiance mind games cast, you're in trouble. Even if you're trying to do, a Rapture into double radiance or, double radiance evangelism type of ramp as well. Everybody else is also healing at those same moments. So you're kind of fighting everybody else for that healing, and you're not able to, for example, schism into the mind games right as the damage hits and collect all this healing, That was one of the things from Legion and even BFA as well, was being able to time that schism just as the damage happens, was just crazy immensely beneficial. For Legion, you're timing, your Light's Wrath so that right at that perfect time it would hit when you needed it to. But some of the biggest things that are different for this expansion is that, like, your Smite follow-through healing doesn't contribute a lot to your Atonement, and you're really heavily focused on your burst. The first 3-4 seconds of Atonement healing is usually the largest, and it could just be that we're overhealing some of these heroic raid fights. We pretty much had 5 healers each time, and it definitely seemed like there wasn't all that much damage going on in the encounters, but it definitely seemed that once a burst happened, once some damage went out, it very rapidly got topped off, and there wasn't a lot of room for error when it came into that. If you mess up your ramp, you're just behind at that point. Ner'zhul thankfully just had a bunch of like steady damage going out from like a shatter mechanic as you quickly peel off his armor to be able to reveal more and more of him. So that was really nice in that regard, so that way, you know, there's something always to heal. That way, if you were a little bit late on the Malevolence, there's Dispel that you have to do that knocks everybody back. If you were a little bit late on that, or if you were not quite getting Mind Games back in time, there was still a lot of damage to be able to heal up. So I liked that part. Unfortunately, that is not every single fight, so there's just more complications that sort of kind of come around for Disc going into it. I do think that Spirit Shell, at least from the testing thus far, I do think that Spirit Shell still has a lot of legs to it. Especially in that cutting-edge progression environment and everything like that. It may not be your max HPS strategy, but certainly for like raid safety, having those extra absorbs on hand, being able to pop multiple mechanics inside a barrier with absorbs up was immensely useful, and it still will be in a lot of cases. But it was very frustrating that I feel like I have these just big gaps where I have nothing going on. I either have to hold on to Mind Games, or I have to use it at a very specific time and force an early Spirit Shell so that my second Mind Games use isn't just trash, right? That's some of the big issues I've been running into so far. Not to mention just using Mind Games and trying to use Mind Bender with Spirit Shell has been a really mixed bag. I feel like I really needed to be able to max out my shields, but then you're sitting there just watching your Mind Bender cooldown for 20, 30 extra seconds at a time per use, and that just feels pretty terrible. So, been a couple of issues coming along with the Disc train. Personally, my wish, my hope, if they want to keep these 30, 40 second type timers, I really hope that they revert Spirit Shell back to about a minute CD. That or, you know, allow us to have a lower CD on Mind Games or something along those lines. You sort of have like the Tina effect, right? When it comes to Disc, when it comes to Venthyr, there is no alternative for it. You just have to run with Mind Games. You sort of live and die by the value that Mind Games and the ramp start to give to you. So whenever something isn't very good for Mind Games and CD, that just affects everything else, right? So you have to balance that around Spirit Shell, around Mind Bender. You could run, sure, Rapture, Evangelism, and then you have a minute and a half CD that you're going to be juggling around a 45 CD with Mind Games, but that doesn't always mean that Mind Games is going to align with the damage. So you might have a situation where you'll have damage happening, you know, every 40 seconds. So the first ramp, you'll be able to get your Evangelism and Mind Games together, and then the second ramp, you just have some Rapture shields and a Radiance and a Schism. So it's been frustrating. There's still more to test for sure. We haven't tested Mythic yet either, and we'll have to figure out what's been going on. But if you have had some great experiences, or you've seen some cool logs or anything like that, please feel free to drop in the comments below. Hit me up on Discord as well, linked in the description. Start sharing some of your experiences if you've seen some cool stuff, as there's still going to be a lot for Disc to test and start figuring out. All right. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions about any of the other raid fights, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, be sure to check out the live stream, as we're going to be streaming all of our raid testing, both heroic and mythic. And we've got full VODs of all of our raid tests. You're going to see the sort of progression as I go through learning and getting some ramps ready and everything like that for the content. Check them out as well below. Thanks for watching, guys. Take it easy.